Okay, so here we have, my name is Lindell. I'll just reintroduce myself. I'm Lindell Hawahi. I am here representing Nakota Times, which is our local newspaper. And what we're going to have a conversation about today is the 10-year agreement, the First Nations Land Management Act, and how it's going to affect our community. Today we have with us Roland Crow, Senator Roland Crow, Wallace Fox. I'm sorry, are you current chief?
No.
And Saul Sanderson. Okay, so Wallace Fox is from the Onion Lake Cree Nation. Saul Sanderson is from James Smith, if I'm not mistaken. Yes?
Chickasaw State Basin.
Okay, and also Wayne Samagnus was supposed to join us, but he hasn't responded to my text, so I could email him. And currently we have approximately 10 community members sitting in the hall, so we can get started. How should we get started? So why don't we start with Senator Roland Crow to give us an introduction, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I don't mind. Good afternoon to everyone and my colleagues from years ago. But I would prefer if I was asked a question. The other thing I would prefer, I would bow to Chief Wallace Fox and former Chief Saul Sanderson. They're far more knowledgeable than I am, and but if there's questions to me on how I feel about things, I'll be very brief and quick on the response. I thank you.
Okay. So moving on then to Wallace Fox. If you can perhaps give us an introduction and perhaps to your experience with the 10-year grant and the First Nations Land Management Act.
Okay, well, thank you, Linda. Senators that are on the line and the people of Carry the Kettle, Nanaskoman, Scott Naugakio, I shake hands with each and every one of you. The Creator's hand, name of the Creator. I was chief for a long time in our community and was taught by a lot of, I had 5 former sitting chiefs when I first was elected as chief. They were on council with me, and they've been plus the spiritual elders of treaty. And like many young people, young leaders, I didn't care until I learned the spirit of the treaty through ceremony and began to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and how important the treaties are. I've done many workshops creating treaty awareness all over different Indian country, different parts, all the way up to the territories. I'm Cree, I'm from Onion Lake. I declined to run for chief 4 years ago. I had enough after 24 years. I was burnt out and tired. So, but I still do a lot of these presentations where I'm asked by different communities. So our experience, it came with C-27, I believe, the consolidated audit, when Stephen Harper was in power, the Conservatives, and the minister, the French dude there, Valcourt. And we felt it was this discriminatory piece of act. And what we saw in it was going to be an economic disadvantage to our businesses, and where people all over the world could see our audits and our balances in our companies. And if we bid on a highway project, companies, neighboring companies that are bidding could see that we don't have the budget, for example. So, and number 2, I agreed to sign a contribution agreement with Indian Affairs. So I only provided that agreement. I didn't, and the rest is own source money, which is sometimes 60 million to $100 million annual budget. And I met with our membership. They said, okay, I explained it in Cree, I explained it in English, our finance staff. And they said, well, only give them the contribution funding agreement. So they took us to court. And by treaty, they are legally bound to provide resources to the nations. That's what the importance of treaty is, the sovereignty. It took sovereigns to enter into a treaty. However, we all know what the genocide that happened amongst our people, colonized thinking, Western thinking. We don't see that. We don't recognize that today. And it only took sovereigns. So that's just an example. The provinces never existed until 1905. But Treaty 4 carried a kettle when you entered into treaty in 1877. And Onion Lake and the others in Fort Carlton in August of 1876 and September in Onion Lake with the Western Treaty 6 bands and also to the west, which is now Alberta. There were no provinces. And without the treaty, and there would still be no provinces today, simple as that. And I get really frustrated when I start thinking about this, this whole area of how our people, through our organizations, are providing the consultation. The old people in our language, they said, "Namoy ni sugatid ko kipigo na umasutamagion. Mago kiowao tenikan hawi pasinis chiko. Unigadio ewang na hawi pikonage." They prophesized this, and I was schooled by a lot of the old traditional elders, the ceremonial elders. They said, no man on two legs can break this. However, in the future, the leaders that you're going to be sitting with, they're going to have this Western mentality and Western thinking, and they're the ones that are going to be so educated in that way that they won't see this treaty and they won't understand it and will disregard it. And unfortunately, that's what's happening all across Treaty 1 to 11. So when we fought, the government took us to court. There was 5 First Nations with us. I believe from memory, Ochapuis, Thunderchild, Pipikisis, Onion Lake, Sutina, Ermineskin. They stood with us when we went to court. However, the bureaucrats played their games, and one health director in Sutina was threatened by the Alberta health region that they were going to lose $3 million if they continued to support Onion Lake's legal position. And eventually, lobbying in the council and the chiefs, we stood alone at the end of the day. And what we found out, 19% of this was in 2014, 19% of the budget at the time, which was about $8-9 billion, went to Indian Affairs to administer. And 21, this was all in federal court, 21% goes to other. And we don't see 41% of that money, it never reaches to the First Nations. And I used to remember the old people saying, they work for us. The Indian Affairs work for us. I never understood it until that time we went to court. When they vote in Parliament, it's called Indian monies. And when it gets to Indian Affairs, it's called policy. Indian Affairs and FNIHB or Health Canada, whatever, they create all these rules. It goes further. What we found in our treaty work, that land was sold for $1 an acre to the newcomer, and that used to go into Indian trust. Back in 1871, there was $1.6 million. 1.6 million acres was sold to the Europeans, and that money was held in trust, and that continued to grow and grow and grow over the years. I think the last acres that were sold was 1912, and that money went, and that's our money that Indian affairs and Canadian governments, practically we have to beg for that money, which is our money. And I wish the hell that a lot of people would have supported us, but unfortunately we stood alone. And we won that case, federal court. And from 2015 till today, we have not signed a funding agreement. In between that 10 years, this 10-year funding came to be. And nobody in Justice, the Attorney General, nobody in the Department of Indian Affairs, Department of Finance, Treasury Board could ever answer Onion Lake. What happens after 10 years? So nobody till this day, our observation and through our work and our technicians at home, through the First Nations Financial Management Act, is connected to the Indian Taxation Commission, is connected to the First Nation Lands Management Act. Basically, if you're familiar with financing on reserve, you can't borrow money. The banks won't lend you money unless Chief and Council guarantee, i.e. CMHC housing. There's a ministerial guarantee attached to that. Unless it's a vehicle, you can't build your own house despite how much AAA credit rating you have. You can't get a loan on Indian Reserve. So they're after the land was what we came to our conclusion. So the old people again used to talk, and my teacher, the one that told me about the ceremonies, talked to me. His father was in Fort Pitt, and he was 98 years old when he passed away, and he never spoke English. He never went to residential school. He was taught the old traditional way. And the land, the TLE, which Onion Lake agreed to, and I wasn't chief at the time, it indemnifies Canada, basically give them off the hook. In the treaty, 1 square mile for a family of 4 or 5. The way the old people up choose the old man, as your population grows, so does your land base. So when people take TLE, you're giving today's leaders, past, present, and future leaders of that nation, you're telling them that basically telling the government we'll never be able to sue you because we accepted a settlement. And every other claim settlement has that indemnification clause. Cows and plows has that indemnification clause. Treaties, agriculture, farming is a part of treaty. So when they take cows and plows the nations, okay, you breach your treaty. Going back to what the old people said, it's our people that are going to break that. Taxation, you're going to have checkerboard reserves, financial management act. We don't need it. The government, the bureaucrats at the time said, well, it's for economic development. It took us 18 months to get a line of credit of $60 million with RBC. So we don't need that First Nation Land Management Act. We had unqualified audits. We had a good rapport with the financial institutions, and that's how we've been building. However, many First Nation communities are not at that advantage to be able to work with First Nation, a bank, a financial instrument. So the 10-year agreement, why they wanted the consolidated audit, they use the excuse, chief and council are hiding their salaries. Chief and council are hiding. Well, Onion Lake, I told that to Minister Valcourt, 3 days in the hall and by Zoom, the people off reserve, we put line items, all the budgets, my salary, my council, everything transparent. And then on the 3rd day, we asked them to make a motion. Can we access our own source revenue? That's transparent. So even the minister, Valcourt, said, we have no problem with Onion Lake. You are in the top 20 of all 630 reserves in Canada of fiscal management. And then at the meeting in Ottawa, when they call us to meet with them, why are you painting us with the same brush then? Why don't you let the First Nations that are developing financial management in their communities to go work with the First Nations that need the help? That offer was never taken. So when you look at this consolidated audit, you look at all the companies' own source revenue that you have 10 years from today, when you sign this, mark my words, they're going to look at a First Nation. You have 3 million here, you have 6 million income, 8 million, whatever the numbers are. They're going to tell you start taxing your companies, start taxing your band members, your employees. And then when you do the First Nation Land Management Act, you can hypothecate 500 acres for commercial development. You can basically hawk that land. 3, 4 years, 10 years down the road, the business goes under. Guess who owns the land? The investor, the bank. And that's what they meant about checkerboard patterns, just like what's happening in the United States. And we never agreed with that, and we don't till this day. And again, as a result of our success in federal court, which the government never appealed, we do not sign a financial contribution agreement. Every fiscal year, tomorrow is April 1st, it just rolls in. The budget as last year. And if there's any addendums and increments, they're in there. Chief and council, we have not signed a funding agreement either with the band or in health. It automatically, because it's legally done. It's legal. They have to provide those resources. But do they tell the rest of the leadership this in Canada? No. Basically, that's how they control every First Nation. Sign here on a dotted line in March, or you don't get funding, which just pisses me off. And I get very angry when I hear that, because they did that to us 30 years ago when we told them to go to hell. So that's just my take in a nutshell on 10-year funding agreements, on fiscal financial management and land management act. Basically, it's an indemnification on all claims. Now, if you do your research on cows and plows, on any kind of claim settlement money, even your TLE ban, look at that generic TLE agreement. It'll say, by accepting this, we hereby indemnify Canada of any and all obligation pertaining to land. So I'll stop there for now because my blood pressure is going up. So thank you, Lindell, and people for listening.
Yep.
And the organizations, just one last, the organizations, i.e. FSIN, AFN, they're the ones meeting with the governments today. Back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, that organization that we're all a part of was a very powerful organization. Politically in Ottawa, it's just a mockery today. However, when I try to meet with certain government ministers, they would say, oh, we already consulted with FSIN. Well, they never come and asked us. So they're the ones bringing those systems across to the nations using trinkets, which is money. And the old people said, stay away from that. Look at the big picture, look at the treaty, look at the Indian Trust Fund, the Indian Monies Fund. Those are our monies anyways. Why are they making you fight over it? So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from the crowd for Wallace Fox.
Yep.
This is-
Yeah, it's a Clint Hayward talking here. I've been looking at all these scenarios and rules that Canada's coming down with federal government. But to begin with, our treaties were never signed with Canadian government.
Right.
They're signed with the British Crown. So we look at the First Nation Land Management Act, the land claims, the 10-year agreement. It all relates to the designation process. Because you look at the 69 paper, and it was Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Jean Chrétien who followed Sir John A. Macdonald's direction. Was to,
Right.
there were 3 items there, which was, one was to let the Indians surrender their own lands. Second was finalize all land claims. And the third was abolish the Indian Act. So 2015, the federal government talked about abolishing the Indian Act already. And that's why now
Right.
Justin Trudeau is trying to finalize all these land claims. So as they say, the apple don't fall far from the tree.
Right.
But those are the things that,
Following through.
yeah, and those are the things that I see are affecting our Indian Act bans. So that's one thing that we need to have more clarification in order for everyone to understand that, right?
Right. Like, I can only speak for our community and what we went through. Section 9124, lands reserved for Indians, treaty Indians, treaty under that. Section 35, and Saul can probably elaborate more on that.
Can
They
you,
took the responsibility in 1982 when they developed the Canadian Constitution, Section 35, existing rights. And the Royal Proclamation recognized Aboriginal title in the native, the people, the inhabitants of this land.
yeah,
The Royal Proclamation, that was the inception and the creation of treaties that none of my British subjects may enter the land of the Red Indian without a treaty. So they went about treaty, and nobody told anybody in Fort Carlton or in Carry the Kettle or Piapot or Onion Lake. By the way, there's an Indian Act that was just passed in Ottawa that's going to absolve all of these promises to administer this and eradicate everything that was supposedly, everything that you already have above and beyond is what was promised to our people. But none of that is happening today, never did from the get-go, in my opinion. So yes, they're using today's language, but people are forgetting the big picture. And I was just talking to Senator Crow about this on the way in. The people, for example, in FSIN and everyone here, the fight that the people, the leaders of yesterday, created the unified position, the FSIN, to protect our treaties. They wouldn't be working without those old people, those wise leaders of the past. There'd be no FSIN without them. But they're the ones that are agreeing to all these policies, not the individual First Nations, and yet now First Nations are being lumped guilt by association.
yeah. So what do you recommend that we do as a Carry the Kettle First Nation? And can you explain about the Section 10 ban? Because Carry the Kettle is Section 10 ban, and I believe same as your reserve.
Is that the membership,
Yep.
citizenship?
Yep.
First of all elections come from the Indian Act in its inception, right? We never had the Indian Act until they took the bans during the uprising in 1885. Onion Lake is actually 2 reservations. So 1914, the Indian Affairs came and met with the old people and said, if you want a chief, you must amalgamate. That's when Onion Lake elections 2-year systems came to be. And in 1985, the Bill C-31 again discriminates amongst our people. So there's the difference treaty pay list. And I'll use the two senators, my two wise friends there, and I have the greatest respect for. They were born before 1951. They are still on that treaty pay list. And the reserve was set aside for treaties. And I've been saying this for years. When the people born before 1951 have all passed on, see, in 1951, they created the Indian Registry. And that's when we all became statutory Indians under the Indian Act, not under Treaty 4, not under Treaty 6. So now our view is when all our people that are born before 1951 in Onion Lake have passed on, they're going to come back and say, we've set aside this reservation 9124 for treaty people. There's no more treaty people. You are all status Indians. Anyone born after 1951. So what we've been doing and talking about in Onion Lake is the lineage, the bloodline. Because in our culture, say your son married a non-Indian and that little grandchild is your grandchild, it's not Métis, it's not half-breed, respectfully saying that, and they marry another non-Indian, that's where the band membership stops. But they're still your great-grandchildren. That's how we look at it as First Nations people. So using that compassion and that love, we don't distinguish 6-1A, 6-1B, the double mother clause, all of those definitions that the government has put on us. Unless my recommendation, you need to continue more education or awareness of all of these rights, because carry the kettle is not unique. Like I said, I've traveled all over, same with salt. The average citizen of every tribe has no and very little understanding of what treaty is. So now we have leaders that are educated in the Western world for the most part, and they don't know who they are, and they don't know the origin, the history of how this came to be. And they just go with the flow, meaning well at times that they want to do something good. They're going to grab $1 million, $3 million. But what about the fine print? What are you giving up in exchange for that? And remember, that is our money anyways from the Indians' trust money. But they're controlling it. So the recommendation you asked, continue to do more of these sessions amongst your people. If you ask the old ones, they'll probably remember, because it'll trigger their memory from when they were 3, 4, 5 years old, when they heard their old people talk about these things.
Thank you, Wallace. Our next question would be for Saul. In what?
I'm going to turn my mic.
Okay, sounds good. So for Saul, with this framework agreement, what is going to become of our treaties?
Well, let me give you some background to give you some perspective on what you're talking about and dealing with. First of all, when we talk about the issue of who we are we? Well, people have to be educated about our inherent rights by sector, inherent rights to education, health, justice, economics, lands, resources, and so on, citizenship, membership. But we have inherent sovereignty as well. And along with that, we have inherent title to lands and resources. Now, the late Judge Lammer years ago said, all your rights supersede everything. He said, but I got two questions, he said. What are they and where do they come from? He never got his answer. But the late Judge Dixon took it over, and I worked with him during the patriation of the Constitution. And when we look at these inherent rights that I'm talking about, where do they come from? They're granted by the Creator to our nations and their peoples, not to just one band or one chief and council. The interests in terms of the rights and status of our people is all those inherent rights I'm talking about. And you can list them all. And I've done that. But after you list them, what are we doing? They identify us how? Indigenous people, Aboriginal people, Native people, Indian people, all those different terms that they use on identifying who we are. Well, your inherent right identifies who you are and who I am. So when we talk about those inherent rights, inherent sovereignty, with our national powers of governing, our national powers of treaty making, and we look at the Crown Indian Nations relations today compared to yesterday, that arrangement has now changed drastically, but people don't understand it and don't know how it was changed. Now, when you look at the inherent rights we have, then we list them and we define them. We've left it up to the courts and the governments to define our rights and our status for us for too long. So when you define them, it's done in our own languages, our different languages, based on our traditions, customs, practices, values, and beliefs. Now you have them all identified. You've now identified them and defined them. For every one of those inherent rights that I'm talking about, granted to our nations and peoples by the Creator, there's a collective duty we have to all of them. We have a collective duty to our national powers of governing, our national powers of treaty making. We have a collective duty to all our inherent rights in every sector. And we have a collective duty to our inherent title to lands and resources throughout our traditional ancestral territory and covered by treaty territory. So when we look at that whole history, how did we exercise the national powers of treaty making? Well, we made treaties amongst ourselves long before we met the white man. And our people were expert at making treaty. So they didn't put everything on the table. How did they do it? Well, everything I just highlighted for you included our inherent sovereignty. They're all reserved, recognized, confirmed, and guaranteed by the national power of treaty making and our treaties. Now, we took Treaty 6 to the UN through the Hobima, chiefs and elders. And the UN declared Treaty 6 an international treaty. So that makes treaties 1 to 11 international treaties. But what most people don't understand and don't know is that treaties 1 to 11 forms one major treaty between the Crown and Indian nations. And the medicine chest in Treaty 6 applies to every treaty area from 1 to 11. Now you put all those articles of treaty from 1 to 11, just the written text of the treaties, that's a powerful treaty. And you add our oral evidence on how the treaty was made and what the treaty is about. The elders say you have to implement the spirit and intent of treaty. Well, what are they talking about? You have to implement everything I just highlighted for you in terms of our sovereignty, our national powers of governing. How? Having jurisdiction for internal, external, and international affairs. The process that everybody's getting engaged in self-government under Indian affairs, that's just a municipal type government. It's not implementing the inherent sovereignty of our nations. And now we have all those inherent rights. You've now listed them, you defined them, and you understand your collective duties and responsibilities for every one of them. What are your plans and strategies to implement them? Well, when you know that, what are the unique and special laws do you make to give them legal effect? When you look at a treaty map of Canada, down the middle of that treaty map, 1 to 11, is all white. Around it is different colored territories. Now, what that means is that neither we nor the Crown has given legal effect to the treaties. And when the elders talk about the spirit and intent of treaty having to be implemented, you don't only implement treaty rights, you implement your inherent rights. So like I've said, in terms of the financing that we do, yes, we do a treaty budget. But if you don't budget for your inherent rights, you're missing half your budget. So I'll come to that a little later. So now we have treaties and treaty rights. And how do we organize and construct our laws to give them legal effect? We got some of our people opposing law to give legal effect to the treaties. Well, I don't know of any other way that treaties have been implemented without giving them legal effect under our laws and our rules. Yes, we have the ceremonies, we have the treaty bundles, we have the pipes, and those are symbols of our nations. They're not just symbols of treaty making. Those are symbols of our nations and our sovereignty. So when we look at that whole field of inherent rights and treaty rights, now you move ahead to look at implementation of your inherent right to health and your treaty right to health. That means then you have to implement your traditional health system and your contemporary health system. Likewise in education, implement your traditional education system and your contemporary education system. So when you look at the contemporary benefits in education, for example, under treaty, that guarantees the recognition of our education system from kindergarten to grade 12. But more than that, it guarantees the recognition of our trades and skills and professional education in post-secondary ed. And it doesn't only guarantee a school like many people talk about, it also guarantees our post-secondary institutions. But again, you see, we don't go there. When we look at that whole process then of implementing our traditional contemporary education system, where is our traditional contemporary education act that scopes out everything that I'm talking about plus? Now, if you want to delegate to set up your own education district, part 2 of your act would do that. And if you want to delegate to a region, part 3 of your act would do that. And we have to look at that because bands now are running their education system. But as soon as they go beyond that capacity they have within their community, they're buying into the provincial education system. Even worse now, we're buying into what you call Indian Affairs in the province calls education districts. Well, we can have our own education districts like I just mentioned, but to buy into that system that they're implementing with education districts with Indians on the board, but incorporating your education district under provincial corporate law, you lose all your authority and your powers of governing over education. Now, that's not what we want. And it certainly doesn't provide for the recognition of inherent rights and treaty rights to education under provincial law and jurisdiction. But we're not only doing that in education. We got health authorities that are incorporated, have child welfare authorities that are incorporated provincially. And on it goes. And we got corporate entities by band, by tribal council, by FSIN. And that's what the 69 white paper 1980 Buffalo Jump is, and the 1947 plan to liquidate Indians' problems in 25 years, and the 1830 detribalization policy of the empire. But those are all based on the doctrine of discovery and the papal bull. What's the papal bull? Now, these are codes of silence that I'm talking about. Most people don't know what the papal bull is about, yet we have representatives over in Rome right now meeting with the Pope. But I can bet you none of them are telling him you have to terminate that 1493 papal bull. What's the papal bull? Well, it says Christian instruction saying indigenous people are not human or Christian. Because they're not human, they don't have sovereignty and government. Because they're not human, they don't have title to lands and resources. Because they're not human, they don't have rights. That's 1493 I'm talking about. We're sitting here in 2022, still dealing with the same issues. So how did they implement them over the last 500 years? I just gave you the example. 1830 detribalization policies. You'll recognize the objectives: civilization, Christianization, integration, assimilation, liquidation, targeting the termination of our nations under law. They outlawed our government, our jurisdiction, and our inherent legal system, our laws. They outlawed our language, our culture, our spiritual affairs, our ceremonies, our lodges, you name it. They outlawed everything that's under our inherent rights and status. Never mind the treaties. 1730, 1830. So then what else did they do? By implementing that papal bull of 1493, that's one of the bases of the systemic racism that everybody keeps talking about. So when you go over to talk to the Pope, he has to terminate that 1493 papal bull. Then he has to enter into a reconciliation implementation agreement, recognizing everything that they rejected and failed to recognize formally in 1493, recognizing our own inherent sovereignty, our national powers of governing, national powers of treaty making, Crown Indian nations relations, all our inherent rights, treaties, and treaty rights. That would be more productive than just getting a pardon or an apology. But you see, we're not there again because most people don't know nothing about what I'm telling you. And I call that a code of silence. So when you talk about what's happening today, we're implementing those policies now. We have incorporations by band in almost every sector under provincial law and jurisdiction. We have corporations by tribal council. In fact, our tribal councils are incorporated. And same in FSIN. You see what's happening is FSIN has they stopped implementing FSIN several years ago. What are they doing? They're implementing FSI Inc. under provincial corporate law. So now today, we are implementing provincial law and jurisdiction right on our reserves and on our people by programs. When you know full well, Section 9124 of the BNA Act prevents the province from legislating for Indians on or off reserve. But not only are they legislating now, we're implementing their laws. That's how serious the problem is. So on the federal side, what did the Auditor General say to Indian Affairs and Canada Health and Welfare? They said, your policies have no legislative base. Well, today we have Section 35 now of the Constitution of Canada. What is that all about? Well, that recognizes everything I just finished talking about, along with our treaties and treaty rights. Recognizes our sovereignty, our national powers of governing, national powers of treaty making, Crown Indian nations relations in a major way. There's a comprehensive legal political framework now that governs Crown Indian nations relations. And many people don't recognize that either. But that started in 1982. Now, what else does Section 35 do? Under the BNA Act of Canada, you have the national powers of governing under Section 91. Section 92 recognizes all the provincial powers. So what Section 35 does now, all those provincial powers under the BNA Act now become federal jurisdiction. And they take over all those provincial powers when it comes to Crown Indian nations relations. So what does that mean? That means now that the feds can legislate law that identifies their legal, jurisdictional, fiscal, and trust obligations in every sector. And now we're opposing federal law. Treaty 6 met in Enoch, I think, about 6 months ago. A number of leaders got together and talked about wanting to resist health legislation federally. The whole discussion was on that. Nothing saying and discussing what they're doing right now. Every one of them is implementing provincial law and jurisdiction, not federal law and jurisdiction. And they didn't even talk about our law and jurisdiction impacting on the inherent right and treaty right to health. So where are we? What are we doing? We're implementing the 69 white paper, devolution policy, and the 1980 buffalo jump devolution policy. So when you ask about the status of Land Management Act, I just told you, under the inherent rights and title to lands and resources and negotiating our treaties through our national powers of treaty making, we reserve the sovereignty of our nations remaining in the title to all the lands and resources and the waters. Now, what did they do? Yeah, they made the Indian Act, setting aside reserve lands for the use and benefit of Indians. But more recently, they made other Indian acts. The Land Management Act is not a new act. That's just another Indian act. But what they've done now is done what they wanted to do in 47, 69, and 1980 Buffalo Jump. They've now made our reserves federal reserve lands, federal municipal lands. How? By declaring under their law that lands having the status of fee simple land status under federal jurisdiction and ownership. That's what the Land Management Act is all about. So it goes to say, why aren't we implementing our own inherent title to lands, resources through our own inherent title to lands and resources act? And that would apply not just on reserves by band, that would apply throughout our whole traditional territories. We never surrendered those. They're reserved by treaty making. They're recognized by treaty making. They're confirmed by treaty making, and they're guaranteed by treaty making. So we have inherent rights and treaty rights to lands and resources that we're not implementing. And we're certainly not going to implement them properly under any federal or provincial law. So when you ask about the Land Management Act, we're now implementing federal law and jurisdiction. And we're behaving more like Indian agents, except we're real live Indian agents. So when we talk about fiscal relations and financing, then when we talk about that framework that governs Crown Indian nations relations, I just said it's a major framework. How is it governed? It's governed by our inherent sovereignty, and the Crown's assumed sovereignty. I just finished meeting with Treaty 2 here in Saskatoon all morning, and we dealt with that issue as well. And you see that framework that I'm talking about now doesn't only provide for treaty relations, and that's all you hear when people talk in the federal government. Well, we want to implement treaty relations, treaty relations, treaty relations. Well, that framework does a lot more than just recognizing treaty relations. It recognizes political relations. What form? Equality of government, jurisdiction, law, and courts. Across the border to the US, you have tribal, state, and federal equality of government, jurisdiction, law, and courts. In Canada, we have the French Civil Code. In Quebec, French law. For the rest of Canada, it's the English common law system. Then it goes on then to recognize how we implement our treaty relations. And I think I've given you enough information on that already. To implement the spirit and intent of treaty, we have to have our laws governing the whole field of inherent rights and treaty rights in every sector. Now, why is it important to have laws governing program standards? If you want to do a proper budget, you need to know what the criteria and data is respecting how you budget for those programs and under what law, what form of law establishes those standards. I already told you, the feds have no legal mandate for their policies. There's no lawful authority for their policies. And they've been told that by their own governor general. Yet they come out and say, oh, we have this 10. That's only a policy with no lawful authority. And then getting back now to the processes and the recognition of relationships. I've talked about the political relations, the treaty relations. What's about the judicial relations? Now that is recognizing our own inherent justice system in the form of a traditional contemporary justice system, again, under our own laws and jurisdiction. And we get into that area, an issue we never talk about, the interface of law and jurisdiction. And that's what I was dealing with this morning with Treaty 2, with their communities and Treaty 2 territory, how they have to come together and identify their interface of their jurisdiction and laws in every area. But then beyond that, we have to be able to talk about the interface and under the federal government and provincial government. They do that right now, every day. They meet on the interface of provincial law and jurisdiction and municipal law and jurisdiction. We never talk about that at all. We don't even go there. Why? A lot of times most people don't know nothing about it. But that's not a good enough reason to not have to deal with it. So where is our justice system? We can't keep complaining about the federal and provincial justice system. We know the systemic racism there is based on that doctrine of discovery, the Papal Bull of 1493, 1830 deteriorization policies, 47 liquidation plan, 69 white paper, 74-76 native policy, and the 1980 Buffalo jump. Now you see, that created a vacuum for us, a major vacuum to the point where we lost control of everything. Our political development, our governments, we lost control of our justice system, our economy, our social safety net, our lands, our resources, our citizenship, our membership, on and on it goes. When a society loses that degree of control, what happens to that society? Well, you're looking at it. It creates all kinds of negative symptoms, abuses, dysfunction, suicides. You could list one-liners, 4 pages long, of what those symptoms are. And we're living them today. So we got to terminate all that, not to implement it, but through those corporate entities that's been set up, we're implementing a lot of those policies. So getting back to the whole area of justice, then, we occupy the field with our own jurisdiction, inherent legal system in every sector. Likewise, then, the feds legislate their jurisdiction, their legal fiscal obligations and trust obligations in every sector. So then you move on to economic relations. Where is our economy? The treaties guarantee economic relations in terms of economic rights, and our inherent rights guarantee economic rights and benefits. So we should have an economy that's community-based, regional, national, international. I've been promoting one for the last 25 years, but nobody's listening. They keep complaining, but that's not going to change anything. If we don't occupy the field with our inherent rights and treaty rights in every sector, we're going to lose them in terms of the economy. But how do we deal with resource revenue sharing? The Treaty 9 chiefs from Ontario brought me to Thunder Bay when they were meeting with Bennett and others on resource revenue sharing. So it came to my turn. I took that chart out that I developed on our own economy. And she said, "What's this?" I said, "Minister, that's our own economy. We're going to implement it by community, regionally, nationally, internationally." And she said, "How?" I said, "Under our own Trade and Commerce Act, occupying the field, right in the community, on our reserves, and beyond the reserves that we have. It'll apply regionally, nationally, and internationally." Now, you see, the other thing that's not understood today, the treaties provide for portability of our inherent rights and treaties. But Section 35 now provides for the portability of our sovereignty, our inherent rights and our treaties and treaty rights. How? Between communities, regionally, nationally, internationally. So when I talk about our economy, it's portable by community, regionally, nationally, internationally. Now Bennett liked that. And I said, you assess the royalty fee, provincial and federal royalty on all resource development today. Well, we can assess a First Nations fee on all resource development. So in our discussion today with Treaty 6 this morning, they've passed their laws respecting what I'm talking about. So they're invoicing the feds and the province $8 million a day for loss of their benefits historically, and looking at their kind of funding that they're entitled to today. And they've done their own calculations on information and data. So they're budgeting for $89,000 per capita for another category of funding arrangements. Now they're doing it, you see. They're not just talking about it. That's what I'm saying for everybody. We should be doing the same thing. Now, when you look at the whole area of economic relations, then when it comes to lands and resources and water, that's where we need those laws, not just for on reserve, but throughout our whole territory. Right now, the province of Saskatchewan is calling for tenders on the sale of all the fresh water in northern central Saskatchewan. And I understand they're now doing that in Alberta as well. So they have 3 tenders right now to buy up all the fresh water. And what have I been saying? Where is our Waters Act, our Environmental Act, occupying the field? We can't just talk about what they're doing. We need to talk about what we have to do and implement them under our jurisdiction laws. So then the other relationship is what you're talking about now in the 10-year funding agreement, fiscal relations. So you ask, what do we do? Well, we have to have our own Finance Administration Act, occupying the whole field of fiscal relations and financing. And when we do that, we do a budget model that's ours. See, we're not budgeting properly. And we have to budget in every sector. So I put together a budget model about 30, 35 years ago. So now many others are using it. And it's going to make a hell of a difference to the kind of funding that they access from the feds. Now, under the contribution agreement or the 10-year funding agreement, what are you tied to? You're tied to funding from only Crown Indigenous services. Section 35 now kicks that door wide open. You can access money from every federal ministry and department now. But under the contributions agreement, which is only a contract, it's only a contract to implement programs and services on behalf of the feds. That's all it is. And the same thing with your 10-year funding agreement. Those rules haven't changed. So when you lock yourself into a 10-year funding agreement, you can't access any of the money from all those other federal departments and agencies. And that's major funding. Because federally, the Department of Crown Indigenous Services only has 15% of the money. I personally worked with 9 cabinet ministers, the Prime Minister's office, and Privy Council for 2 years. And they wanted to know what the alternatives are for during the pandemic and after the pandemic. So I put a document together identifying that along with the charts that I have. So the Minister of Finance responded in 2 days. I said, you need to increase the funding this fiscal year, 2022, from 11 billion to 17 billion. And he responded in 2 days agreeing to that. But when I was doing that, I didn't see any leaders anywhere in Ottawa. I met with Privy Council several times. I never seen one Indian there. Yet that's where they make a lot of the decisions on financing, fiscal relations, governing bodies, laws and policies. But nobody ever goes there today. So when they changed the Minister of Finance, the one that resigned, that made that commitment, Tara from Privy Council, the operation and manager of Privy Council, she called me, she said, Saul, did you get that in writing, that commitment for 17 billion? I said, yes, I have it. She said, send it to me. I'm going to make sure that the new Minister of Finance keeps that commitment. But as you know now, the new Minister of Finance allocated and identified 18 billion. And the other thing I asked for was all the pandemic money be in addition to that. So that's what is there today. All the pandemic money is supposed to be in addition to that. Then they were looking at creating a multi-billion-dollar fund for Canadian economy, $180 billion over 10 years. We weren't even included in that. And when I put forward the chart I have on our own economy, I said we need 100 billion over 10 years to implement this economy. Now they've included us in those plans for that multi-billion fund for the economy. But we have to have our plans and strategies in place to do that. Now, again, where are we? So what I'm saying to you is through your own Finance Administration Act, you are able to do your own framework for budgeting. And along with that, then you need your laws and policies governing those program standards if you're going to budget properly. But then you're budgeting now not just for treaty and treaty rights, you're now budgeting for inherent rights as well. If you don't budget for inherent rights, you're missing out half of your budget. Now, when we look at that whole process of under their law, their Finance Administration Act and your Finance Administration Act, that provides you the opportunity to enter into a government-to-government fiscal agreement, recognizing you occupying the field on our side with all your laws and your jurisdiction, and they occupy the field with all their laws and jurisdiction on their side. They're the other party to treaty, we're the other party to treaty. So when you do that, then the accountability for all the money that you receive through that government-to-government fiscal agreement, you're only accountable to your people and your government, not to the feds. The feds transfer federal funding to provinces in the form of billions of supplementary money in health, in education, in social development. All the child welfare money that they use today provincially, that's all federal money. They don't put a damn cent into Indian child welfare and family services. That's all federal money transferred to them by the feds. So what they've been working on as well, we need our own federal First Nation social safety net so that all those monies are transferred directly to our governments, our institutions, and our people. Because the other category, they have 4 categories. The health category in that area is for hospitals, Medicare, dental, optometrist, statutory funding, levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 care and special needs. In the social development area is child welfare money, home care, elders care, and levels 1, 2, 3, 4 care and special needs. On the education side, it's funding transferred to the province for post-secondary money for their colleges and universities. But the president of Treasury Board has an arrangement with universities for research money and scholarship money. When we investigated it, we found that out of the scholarship money that they were providing was for doctorates, like PhDs and that level, minimum 70,000 a year. Only one Indian qualified for that funding, yet they know damn well we're short post-secondary funding. But only one Indian in Canada, the late Peter Kelly from Winnipeg, qualified for that major fund. So what I'm telling you, you see, I said earlier, Crown Indigenous Services only has 15% of the money that we're eligible for federally. Now that's our money. Like somebody already said, that's not their money. That's our money. So when do we go forward to get our fair share? And a few years ago, I put one chart together. It was very colorful, identifying all the sources of revenue. And again, you see, we don't go there to identify all the different sources of revenue. So I met with Les Linklater. He was a secretary to cabinet, and he brought 3 of his officials with him. When I gave them the document, when he was sitting down, the page that opened up was that chart, a very colorful chart. And when I was sitting down, he said, Saul, he said, this is a very colorful rainbow, he said. And I said, yes, Les, and there's a hell of a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, and I'm here to get my share. Now, the other issue that I've been dealing with, they've been talking about billions of funding that they need. How long? For 35 years. 2022, we're still talking millions. And I said, it's damn time that we start dealing with our financing arrangements in the billions like you do. So that's the documents I put together, and Privy Council agreed with me. But before Christmas, Tara from Privy Council called me again and she says, we got a problem solved. She said, how do we transfer billions to First Nations? And I said, I hope you're not saying that you're not going to provide billions. Oh, no. She said, we agree with you. You got to elevate the funding to First Nations into the billions, like you say. But she said, how do we transfer it to First Nations? I said, Tara, that's simple. And she says, Saul, there's nothing simple about transferring billions. I said, yes, there is. I think you got what you call a Department of Finance, don't you? Yes, we do. She said, you got it at every level, federal, provincial, municipal levels? Yes, we do. Well, your Department of Finance includes a Department of Revenue. Now, isn't that where you transfer all your money to? To those governments and those municipalities? She said, yes. And your Department of Finance accounts for it, audits it, manages it, and reports on it? Yes. And I said, well, Tara, you and I have a big problem. She said, what's that? Our First Nations don't have departments in education, in health, and they certainly don't have departments of finance and revenue. She says, what? I said, I just told you, we don't have departments of finance and revenue. Oh, she said, I thought you had all that. I said, no, you don't get the funding to do it. Well, she said, that has to change. Every government of the nations have to have departments of finance and revenue. Now, you see, the question you're asking is just an administrative function of the federal government to keep you administering your poverty. I'm talking of billions of dollars, not millions. So that strategy for how we budget under our own Finance Administration Act, that's major funding that would change your funding to every band, every tribal council, FSIN, and so on. Now, the issue of AFN came up everywhere I go. And yesterday, and day before yesterday, and today, this morning. Well, like I said, FSIN, the Federation of Scotch-Indian Nations, was stopped being implemented years ago. And they moved to setting up processes to implement FSI Inc. under provincial law and jurisdiction with only an administrative structure, not a governing structure like the FSIN and FSIN Convention and Convention Act provides for. Now, if you only have an administrative structure of government, you don't have an executive function of government. Now, that's major funding. That's 35 cents on the dollar that the feds and the provinces and municipal governments get. But it's not in just one area. It's in every sector. What is executive management funding for? It's for political accountability on how you implement your jurisdictional laws, and it's program accountability that includes identifying how you implement and enforce your laws governing the program standards. And without that, you can't have a proper audit. You have to have the Auditor General's people going around the country declaring acceptable or audits or rejecting audits. When I met with the late Auditor General and his people about a year and a half ago in Ottawa, I said, excuse the term, but I said, you got big balls. When he knew I was coming to the meeting, he came himself. I said, I'm glad you came. And I said, the reason you have big balls is because you're doing an audit on us and you don't even know what the hell kind of laws are governing program standards on your side, never mind on our side. And that's not legal to do an audit without having to identify how laws are implemented that govern program standards. So he sat there looking down and looking down and looking down. And finally he said, I agree with you. Well, I said, what the hell are you doing? Sending your people out to do audits without them knowing what laws are governing program standards. You know damn well it's illegal. And he said, yes, it is. Well, I said, that has to change. And he agreed with me to the point where he was prepared to set up our own Auditor General's office under FSIN, and they would help train the people. But not only that, I said, you're making Myers, Norris, and Penny billionaires, not millionaires. They're not just auditing anymore. They took over executive management right in our operations and our offices. And they're collecting that executive management fund when it should be coming to our governments and our departments and our programs. And again, he agreed. But here you are today, you see, you sign a 10-year agreement. There's no executive management fund in that agreement. And there's no executive management fund in the contribution agreements. So I've given you a bigger picture of what impacts on your questions. And it's pretty major. Now, along with that, then comes the political relations agenda, recognizing international relations. And I identified for you how we can implement under our own jurisdiction law respecting our inherent rights, treaties and treaty rights. So that's a long answer to your question, but there's no short answers if you're going to paint the picture properly. Did I put everybody to sleep?
So we did have one question regarding okay, it's a two-part question, I guess. So with the objectives of the policies being as such that they are to terminate us as treaty peoples, with the TLE agreements that were already signed on many First Nations, what role did these TLE agreements play into advancing their schemes that they have?
They had you vote on the TLE agreements, eh? When you
Yes.
voted on ratifying your TLE agreements, did you know that you were also voting on accepting and ratifying the Federal Provincial Treaty Land Entitlement Act?
We are still in a learning process.
Well, you see, when you voted on accepting your TLE agreement, they identified you as accepting the Saskatchewan Treaty Land Entitlement Act. Now, what that does, you're accepting the 1930 Natural Resources Transfer Agreement, and you're changing some of the conditions of the 1930 Natural Transfer Agreement. Why do you think the provincial government has getting encouraged by doing what they're doing to restrict us from hunting, fishing, trapping, and gathering? What they're doing there now is they're designating the status for the use and occupation of those waters and those lands and those resources under their rules, under their jurisdiction, and eliminating how we can hunt, fish, trap, and gather on those lands and those waters. And that's not even discussed. So your TLE agreement allowed them to include your name on that list of bands that are accepting the Saskatchewan Treaty Land Entitlement Act. And that Treaty Land Entitlement Act eliminates a lot of your benefits for lands and resources under the treaty that you have. But nobody knew, not one chief knew anything about that Saskatchewan Treaty Land Entitlement Act.
So is there any paths of recourse for this? Or are we stuck? Are we locked in that?
What did I say? I said you need your own inherent title to lands and resource acts.
Okay.
What are we doing about it? Nothing. And that act would apply throughout your whole treaty territory. And of course, when you look at the treaty boundaries that they drew, they overlap your ancestral traditional territory. So in some cases, the bands in Treaty 6 along the borders of Treaty 6, their traditional lands and resource territory would run into another treaty area. But that doesn't mean they're not entitled to the inherent rights and treaty rights in those other treaty areas. Now, the big thing to remember is that our inherent sovereignty, our inherent rights our treaties and our treaty rights are portable. There's no such a thing as a treaty boundary or a provincial boundary when we talk about the portability of our sovereignty, our inherent rights, title, and inherent rights to, and our treaties and treaty rights. But we allow ourselves to get caught up in their jurisdiction and their laws. So under the Finance Administration Act, like I said, you would enter into a government-to-government fiscal agreement that recognizes your total jurisdiction for fiscal relations and financing of your government. And you
Let
would,
me jump in on TLE if you don't mind. Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me jump in on TLE for a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is thank you for everybody and to yourselves for organizing this get together. The second thing I want to say is I'm not a First Nation. I'm a treaty band member from PIPOC number 75 A and B. When it comes to treaty land entitlement, I was part and process of it, and if there's some doubt about it, I deserve every criticism there should be. But let me tell you something about TLE. Is the things that people are suffering with from the TLE agreement is because nobody has the courage to stand up and have them implement that as it was. That is a bilateral agreement only with the federal crown and right of Great Britain in regards to treaties. And the province was at the table, but they were non-participants, they were only observers. And the things that are coming into place today is because people don't understand and haven't read the TLE agreement, and they're changing that agreement by policy. And let me be blunt and to the point, like I usually am. The chiefs don't understand it, they don't want to touch it, and they don't want to do anything. Let me tell you another thing about TLE. Even the bands that don't have TLE today have a right to TLE because we had the opportunity to include our Bill C-31s. And the federal government was not in agreement, neither was the province, because it built up our quantum, our data per survey. So when we talk about TLE, there's a lot of things people don't know and understand, and the chiefs don't understand. And I say that in all due respect, including my own chief and council. And when it comes to land management, I'll tell you that it's just a rapid way, a quick way of encumbering our lands. And what's it doing? Well, today, what we need to do is exactly what people like you are doing, is waking up our own Indian people. And we got to get rid of our Indian Act chiefs. These 10-year agreements are nothing but on paper, and you watch as we go down the road. In the next 3 to 5 years, those agreements will come to an end. They will never see the light of day for 10 years. And the difference between today's 10-year agreements and our treaty agreements is our treaties don't have a sunset clause or an end clause. And when we say, what are we going to do? It's our problem. Our problem is we've let too many Indian Act chiefs and councils who are more disciplined from the federal government than they are from our own people. And there's no transparency whatsoever in regards to the detailed finances. And there's no transparency in the agreements they sign. If there are bands, and I know there are today, that are signing agreements with Farm Credit, and Farm Credit gives them large loans to proceed, and those lands are guaranteed by the acres that treaty entitlement bands have today. So that's their backdoor approach to taking our lands away from us. Under the land management agreement, chiefs and councils don't even respect our traditional holdings and the lands that were passed down to us. Today's chiefs and councils feel they're more powerful than the agreements their forefathers and our elders in Kekeak, our older people have signed. So those are just some of the highlights. And in regards to what do we do today, I take my hat off to the both gentlemen that spoke in regards to the history of where we are and why we are there today. But we got to talk about today and what goes on tomorrow and how we rid our Indian reserves of treaty agents that are in sheep's clothing. The other thing to talk about gaming just for a minute, and we talk about sovereignty. You know, Bobby Cameron, I don't call him chief, I call him Bobby Cameron, and it's with reason that he talks about sovereignty. That is the biggest fallacy that's ever come out of an Indian agent's mouth. When we talk about sovereignty, why are we giving the province tens, and I say tens of millions of dollars every year on the gaming agreement? If we're sovereign, why do we have to share with them? The other thing that they've done is Bobby Cameron signed an agreement with the province of Saskatchewan, with Mo, to allow game wardens on our reserves so as they could come and check our stoves and our fridges and our deep freezers for wild game. Like, how can this guy speak out of both sides of his mouth and say we're sovereign when he walked that all the way with that agreement with the province? And talk about sovereignty. Now he wants to take the electoral officer from the last FSI election, and guess where he's taking it? He's taking it to Muniau Court. He's taking it to the white man's court. Like, how does this guy walk on both sides of the line? I don't get. I cannot comprehend what goes through this guy's mind. But that's our own doing. We gotta wake up. Why when we talk about elections, they stroke people off the list without any transparency and a reason why they stroke them off. There's people today that are in that executive that have criminal records that have not shown up because the electoral officer let them go. Not the electoral officer, what is supposed to be the committee, which has 2 senators and 2 veterans on it, and they took those people off. If people wonder why I resigned from the FSI Senate, FSI and Inc. Senate, is because I can't live with the corruptness and the bullshit that's going on. And you know, when we signed the gaming agreement, there was never I signed that gaming agreement. There was never a clause in that agreement that gave the right to the FSIN chief and executive to compensate themselves to the tune of $150,000 to $200,000 a year out of gaming money. Every cent of those monies were supposed to go to our Indian bands, our communities, and to the elders and to the youth. And I don't think any of these people that are currently in the FSI and executive are youth or elders, unless I blinked and missed it all. So that's a short summary, but I think we have to talk about today's terms and tomorrow's terms. And we cannot advance. And I say that with the deepest regret and sorrow that we can't advance with these Indian agents that are looking after us. I come from the days where the federal government appointed Indian agents, and they appointed some terrible ones. But you know, now and then there was the odd good one. But you know something, today we're electing our own Indian agents. And heaven forbid if we keep going on this way. And I make my comments relatively short. But I really want to deal with what we're going to do today and tomorrow. And those of you in that community of Carry the Kettle, Indian Band are doing exactly the right thing. We have to wake up the people that have been asleep. We have to wake up the people that are being bought by their own money, because these people don't account on how they spend their money. Every agreement that any chief and council has ever signed for any length of time should have always been brought to our communities. So with that, I thank everyone, and it's enlightening to see many of our older people, our younger people, like you younger people, getting up from under this burden that's being cast upon us by our own people and Indian agents. And I thank you very much. I take my hat off to the previous speakers, but today it's what are we going to do today and tomorrow. I thank you all. If there's any questions, I'll answer them before I have to go.
Roland, we have 2 questions here for you.
You can ask them. Come over here. Come over here.
Roland, I just have it's just a quick question. I have this old Indian Affairs document dated Guide to Indian Bands and Agencies in Western Canada, 1871 to 1959. And it covers the treaties from 1 to 11.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the Dawson Band in the Yukon, it says this band has not signed any treaty. Moosehide Reserve created by order in council dated March the 27th, 1900 and October 9th, 1900. So reserves were created by order in councils?
Most of the time, yeah.
Okay, so so why did we allow that to happen? How come we're reserves? I thought like.
Sorry?
Because I was told that reserves are POW camps. Right? I mean, that's what I was taught. And anyways, so this other one says Orphans of St. Albert, Treaty 6, not a band as it has no chief. So they wouldn't allow this band, they wouldn't let them create a band because they had no chief. However, Order in Council 1133 dated March 19th, 1876 stipulates that annuity payments were made to natives attending school in St. Albert, Lac La Biche, and Isle of Cross on December 7th, 1876. So they were already giving out annuity payments back then.
Well, they qualify to be a band even in today's terms and conditions, but I'll tell you another thing about the territories. The territories made an arrangement with the federal government where they would be part and parcel of municipal governments and the elections. And that is a very, very bad situation. The other thing, if you look at the big land settlement in British Columbia, they got a very sufficient land base. But as that agreement runs out, they will have to start to pay their services, and they will not be eligible for the treaty benefits that we get as Indian people. Okay. BC will have to sign, will have to pay for their medical, their education, and transportation, which reminds me of another issue that I didn't mention under the TLE agreement. This TLE agreement is going to run out in a matter of a year or two. And if these people don't get to the table and renew that agreement in the condition and the understanding and the agreements of the federal crown on TLE, we will never see the light of day of acquiring all our lands including our shortfall lands, because they're getting rid of the PFRA pastures. And that's where a lot of the lands had minerals. And you can't reach shortfall if you don't acquire minerals. So they're doing that to short us. But you know, there was not, for the exception of Chief Samaganus, there was not one chief who came to our table to address the sales of stolen land. And I have to say this about MLA Betty Nippy. She was the only one from the provincial government or the provincial legislature who came to support us in what we are trying to do. But this TLE agreement is going to run out. And when it runs out, I wish us all a long life, but we'll never see the opportunities that TLE committed to us and is being breached and broken every single day by white government.
Hi, Roland.
Hi,
I just have a quick question for you.
how are you, my friend?
Good, how are you doing?
As well as can be for a grouchy old guy nowadays.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'm gonna make you grouchier.
Okay,
So our band, I'm gonna talk about Carry the Kettle specifically because that's what we're gathered here for.
yeah,
We are under this 10-year agreement. We're entering this lands policy, First Nation Land Management Act. We've, not us, but Chief and Council have implemented lands policies for us to rent our own pastures, although our lands are still under BCR, right? We're still with Indian Act under that. But they have this, yeah, they are. But they have a no trespassing policy that they've implemented here against members. It's not that we can exercise it against them, it's them against us. So are they moving us further away from our treaty inherent rights, knowingly that they've entered into this government agenda here? Are they taking away our rights and our lands eventually, that we're going to be a rural municipality? We're basically going to be like white people?
basically, as I see things go on here, and I never thought I would see this day, but we are going to be brown municipalities with these Indian Act chiefs and the FSIN. And you know, there's always been traditional understandings in all of our Indian bands. You know, the lands that were promised to us by our forefathers and the Creator when we lived in what is now called Western Canada, we always respected each other, and we respected traditional hand-me-downs of our traditional grounds. And these people have breached every possible thing possible under the Land Management Act in regards to our rights as treaty people. You will see in the near future with this land management that no matter where you build on that Indian reserve called Carry the Kettle and or Pipot, that I would have to go to the band office hat in hand to get a permit to put a house on the lands that have been handed to me by my parents and my grandparents. Now, you know, they call it Kitamaki, Twin and Cree. That means compassion for your fellow Indian and band member. There is none of that anymore. It's just a money grab. And all of these people that are there are, I'll be as blunt as I can, are traitors to agree to federal government's policy and regulations and not enforce and respect our own traditional rights. I hope I've answered your question, my friend.
Yes, thank you. And I just have one more thing to ask. Is it too late for us treaty people, because these chief and councils are now basically Indian agents and have moved away from their treaty rights? How can we opt out of this? Because we're further in than we, I think, thought we were. We weren't aware, because now we've found documentation where we're going to be paying taxes, I believe. They signed in BC with the Federation of Taxes, and we just found that the other day. So is that going to be implemented here without us even being made aware of it? Is there any way we can opt out of this?
Absolutely. The other thing that's going to happen with this 10-year agreement, it will never see the 10 years, but our treaties were forever. But these 10-year agreements, the money is going to start to dry up. We're going to be paying for our health. We're going to be paying for our education. And we're going to be paying for water, sewer, and busing. Like in BC, they have to pay for their own busing. It doesn't come out of Indian Affairs budgets anymore. They have to look after that themselves because they signed that agreement back 15, 20 years ago. And the same in the territories. But when it comes to today and what do we do today, it's our duty. And I commend all of you over there in Carry the Kettle and some of the other Indian bands that are wanting to wake up the people. And the other thing that's happening to us in our communities, and I see it every day, they don't like independent Indians and Indians that speak up. And they have ways financially to discipline us and hurt us. And they do crazy things like, oh, you know, everybody's road will be cleared, but suddenly mine's not cleared. You know, that's vindictiveness and jealousy. But they can't stand Indian people that stand up and speak for themselves. And you'll see garbage pickup will disappear, water delivery will disappear. If it will be back to the old days, and I say this in a joking way, where we all drove 4x4s. And you know what a 4x4 was those days? 2 shovels in the truck, in the trunk. So we always had to shovel. And now we got graders and everything else, but we're not treated fairly at the band level. And they're intimidating our people with our own money. That's the silence, what silence is. But some of us are too stubborn to be silenced. And if I fall into that category and stubborn and grouchy, I totally agree.
Okay, Roland, do we have another member of the community who has a question to pose?
Yes.
Hi, Roland, Connie here. Okay, going back to the TLE thing you were talking about.
Yeah.
You said if we do not do something about this, we are going to be in trouble. Say, for example, if one reserve is to stand up and fight this, could we do something? I mean, we have a lot of reserves here, but I mean, we as Carry the Kettle don't want this to happen. So can Carry the Kettle stand up and fight this issue?
If you're chief and council at the moment, it's not the answer you're looking for, but until we get a true Indian chief and council that's not terrified by white policy, we are in big, big trouble. And you know, if bands opt out of the 10-year agreement right now, the damage is irreparable. We will pay for this agreement for a long, long time until we get a change and we have chiefs and councils, not Indian agents. So it really depends on us as individual band members to make certain that we have the best possible representation. Like I make note of the Federation, they speak on our behalf. I never voted for Bobby Cameron. And that vote has to be, every band member in this province has a right to determine who the leader is of the FSI, and as we once knew it. There's too much corruption in the election, which is in a court of law today. And there's too many delegates that are bought and paid for. I make an example of one band that had 13 voting delegates under the convention of the FSI Legislative Assembly. And 2 band members voted. Two representatives from that band voted. Excuse me. And yet in the count, it recorded 13 votes. So somebody who had the list inside on how to delegate vote voted in the absence of those councillors or delegates that didn't show up. That's how corrupt they are.
Okay, thank you so much, Roland.
Oh, you're welcome.
So as we near the close of our presentation today, is there any, as you know, we have an election coming up in our community, and there are some candidates who are here today. And if you have any advice to give them, even the people who are voting, what kind of future we should vote for in our community? If you have any last words between you and Saul. I noticed that Wallace has left the building, so if you would give us any insight that you could.
Well, you know, I'm reluctant to say something, but I will anyway, which sometimes they say more than they should. But you know, to the Carry Kettle band members, regardless the personalities, the petty politics, and some of the jealousies that prevail in our communities, unfortunately, vote for a person who's going to speak for Carry the Kettle and protect our trees. That I want to put a stop to the land sales of the PFRA picture, the province selling stolen lands, and who's willing to stand up and say, I want to stop to this land sale because it's fraudulent. You are buying from somebody that doesn't have title to that land. And when we talked about the 1930 transfer agreement, it's very, very clear in the 1930 transfer agreement that those lands were to be held in trust for us until all the entitlements were finalized. So whether, you know, put aside the personal feelings, vote for the person who's going to fight white government and look at our communities as a priority, not the funding agencies. We have that same problem in PIPOT, but we try to overcome it as former leaders in our communities. And you guys are the leaders of the future. So vote for a chief and a council that's going to stand up to government and quit being intimidated by white government. That's about as far as I'll go. Put all the personalities aside.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Saul, do you have any closing words to offer the community that's sitting here with us and those online?
Well, everything that I highlighted for you impacts on the members of Carry the Kettle collectively, including any leaders that are elected now and in the future. See, we had what you call 500-year calendars. They're not April, May, June, July. Those are calendars that scoped out the path that we should be following collectively in our nations over 500 years. So no matter who the leader was and who the people were responsible for our governing, they had to maintain their responsibilities for implementing that 500-year calendar. Now, everything that I highlighted for you just a while ago, including what we have to do and how, you see, that's what's missing, is the how. So if you want to change your fiscal relations arrangements, you need to have that Finance Administration Act, no matter who's elected as chief and council. And those are pretty fundamental issues that impact on all of us, not just Carry the Kettle. But we're not doing it. So they need to elevate your agenda. And some people get a little annoyed when I talk about it. You're dealing with an administrative agenda. So your chief and council meet. 85% of their agenda is administrative. What I gave you in my presentation, that's a political agenda.
That's right.
And they're elected to represent the political agenda. But we don't structure it that way. So no matter who you get elected, if they're not going to implement the political agenda I just highlighted for you, then they're still going to be struggling with their administrative agenda that right now is basically controlled under provincial law and jurisdiction, not your laws and jurisdiction. So the struggle you're going to have there will be no different from carry the kettle to any other band of our nation. So we need to come together collectively. And when you do an election, whoever wins the election, everybody has to support them, not just those who voted for them. So that's my message. Thank you.
Can I make one more comment?
You certainly can.
Yeah, I want to say to Joellen there, I have the original book on tree land entitlement, and if you want to do all of us a favor, phone Jay or text Jay and get him to send that book to you, and you'll have a very good view of the TLE agreement in which we understood to have signed, not in this twisted arrangement where by policy they are changing that. So if you could make a note of that, my friend, that'd be great, and get him to send it to you right away.
What is that book called?
The land is everything. And you know, when we talk about breaches, I'm sorry to go on, but you know, the biggest breach in regards to treaty land entitlement and our treaty protection was the breach of Bobby Cameron's office and the treaty commissioner who sat on her hands and did nothing when we told her 3.5 years ago this land was going to be up for sale, and never even give it a second thought. And they don't have those books anymore. I think they probably shredded them because it laid out in great detail the whole process. See, if there was a disagreement, there was a clause in there where we would appoint from both sides, the federal crown and treaty bands, a table to negotiate the shortfalls that the federal government was coming up with and changing by policy, not by virtue of the agreement. So talk about a breach while Bobby was asleep and the treaty commissioner, this present treaty commissioner.
Okay. Is that all?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'd like to thank you very much, both you, Saul, and we'll extend thanks to Wallace later for coming and sharing your information with us and with our community. And we look forward to hearing and talking more soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the thank you is the other way around. Thank you, guys.
You gotta come. Oh,
Thank
somebody
you.
in the crowd wants to come and ask a question real quick.
Okay.
Hey, Ron, how you doing?
As well as I can, my friend.
This is Dean. I was wondering, when can you guys actually show up here in person? Can we set another agenda?
Sure, we can. If I have about, you know, for not having a job, I'm busy as hell, but that would be great. Yeah, that would be great.
Because we want to ask some more other questions on some other issues that we were talking about before, to let the people know.
Yeah.
All righty, I'll sit down with some of us here and we'll organize a time and when you guys are available.
I thank you for the invite.
Yeah, no problem with me.
All righty, thank you very much, Saul.
Anybody else have questions? Come up now.
Well, come over here. Sit here so we can hear.
One of the people in the crowd asked,
Sure,
is
right.
it okay if she has a document that states that Carry the Kettle signed Treaty 6 and Treaty 4? Do you
Yeah.
know anything about that?
No, I didn't know that, to be honest.
Carry the Kettle or Long Lodge?
Yeah, your national powers of treaty making don't restrict you to one treaty.
That's right.
You can negotiate and implement as many treaties as you want.
Okay.
You're
That
not
answers-
implement-
Yep. All right.
Here.
Well, we will thank you guys very much for showing up.
Well, thank you.
Thanks. to
Thanks
all
for
of
the
you who
opportunity.
watched.
Yeah,
Look forward. You have,
to seeing you in person.
you have a good rest of your week.
As we would say
Okay.
in Creek, East, we're not used to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
Are you still there, Roland?
Yes, I am.
You can bring the speakers this way.
You can't get rid of me now.
Hershey, he gave you a message, your book to get.
Oh, okay.
You could bring the other speaker this way.
Yeah. Somebody.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I already did, sorry.
Roland, do you want Jay to send that book back?
I want him to send it to you, kiddo.
Okay,
I mean, Joella.
okay.
I'll get him to mail it back to me then. Okay?
That'd be great.
Okay.
And you keep it, you guard it with everything you got. It's the only one in captivity in Saskatchewan right now.
Recording it.
What's that?
You guard it with your life. That's the only one in captivity in Saskatchewan right now because the treaty commissioner got rid of the rest.
Okay, okay, yeah, I'll make sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. See you.
Oh, thank you.
See you, Roland.
Yeah, take care.
And meeting is over.
Okay, Millie's just gone to the washroom. She'll bless